Hello, everyone. My name is Kate Hidalgo Bellows, and I'm a reporter for The Chronicle covering health and safety. If you're here today, you're probably well aware of the urgent mental health crisis facing teens and young adults today. According to the Centers for Disease Control, in 2021, more than 4 in 10 high school students reported feeling persistently sad or hopeless. Many of those students are now in college or preparing to enter college. How can colleges better serve them? To address that question, I'm here with 2 students who are involved in their campus's chapters of Active Minds, a nonprofit organization run by students that advocates for mental health among young people. Please welcome Rashna Eddelur and Zafir Nassim. Rashna is a junior at Texas A&M University, where she's a member of her campus's chapter of Active Minds. As someone who grew up in a small town where mental health is not often discussed, Rashna cares a lot about improving student well-being. Zafir is a senior at the University of Maryland at College Park and is also the president of his campus's chapter of Active Minds. He started a chapter in high school after seeing his peers struggle with mental health. He went on to revive UMD's Active Minds chapter in the pandemic. Welcome, Rashna and Zafir.
Thanks for having us, Kate.
We're excited to be here.
Awesome. So happy you're here. First, I'd like to hear from both of you about how you got interested in mental health advocacy.
Yeah, I can go ahead and get started with that one. Sorry about that, Rashna. But yeah, for me, my story with mental health advocacy kind of started in high school, as Kate mentioned in the little bio blurb that she had over there. In my high school, I went to a pretty diverse high school. Very thankful for that experience, having people from all sorts of different backgrounds. And also, in terms of my high school experience, I've been to all sorts of different high schools. So I went through private, homeschool, international, and I finally landed at public school. And the common thread I saw between all of that was like the kind of the stress that a lot of students were facing with school. Because, school is hard, and especially like being thrown into it. You're growing, there's always hills and valleys, right? So school is tough for a lot of people. And I noticed that for some in particular, it took a really big toll on them. To the point that we would have students that would just disappear from our community. They lost their lives to suicide, and it just got me thinking, like, okay, why is that happening? And as I slowly got into it further, mental health is multifactorial. There's so many different reasons why poor mental health exists amongst the youth population, but there are definitely some key things that we can pick on and kind of work on. So that's how I got started in mental health advocacy, and I'm glad to still be working on it today.
So my story is kind of the opposite, really. Like Kate mentioned earlier, I'm from a smaller East Texas town. I went to high school there, so my high school was not as diverse. And the concept of mental health was just not something that was ever spoken about in high school. We never spoke about our issues. We never spoke about emotional stuff like that. It was all just supposed to be silenced and internalized. And so that was a really big problem for me, because you would see these students around us, they'd be stressed out. We're teenagers, we're on social media, we have all of these different things just piling on in our lives. And the fact that it just wasn't open enough to talk about pushed me to want to be a mental health advocate.
Thank you guys both for sharing. I really appreciate your perspectives today. Research shows that youth mental health is worse today than it was a decade ago. What do you think is driving this crisis?
Yeah, as I said in my little blurb earlier, I think there's a lot of different things. But I also think one of the main things could be probably expectations. I think students today are definitely fronted with a lot of different expectations up front, whether that's like to do well in school, whether that is to, you take care of all their different things that they might have going on. I know a lot of students today are much more inclined to try to go into really big fields, and all these different stressors, I think, are compounding on each other. And I think that's why a lot of students are facing a lot of issues, but it's also a problem of folks being really internal about their emotions, right? One of the things that we try to work with at Active Minds is try to defeat the stigma around mental health, right? And a lot of people, even till this day, despite a lot of the work that we have done, there still seems to be that big barrier of stigma. And that's why I feel like there's the problem continues to persist. But I'll let Rachna add on.
Yeah, I completely agree with everything Zafir said, but I would also add on that social media could be a driving factor. We are a generation that loves our technology, and sometimes that does set higher expectations than what's natural. Like Zafir was saying, people are posting their happiest moments, their proudest moments, and then other people who see that, they internalize that and they think, why am I not there yet? Why am I not there yet? So I think that aspect of not being as vulnerable or authentic on social media does cause an increased mental health issue upon our generation. And also, our generation is very open. We have a lot of opportunities. We don't have to go down the specific path anymore or this specific path. And I think the idea of trying to find yourself and find who you are at an early age when you have all these opportunities in the world, that can also be.
What do you feel like colleges don't understand about students today, and what could they do to improve their understanding? Rachna, if you'd like to answer that one first.
I think community is a very big aspect about having a solid mental health. And I'm from the South, I'm from Texas, and I was listening to the talk earlier about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And all of these are such important things to making people feel comfortable and happy and open enough to talk about their feelings and talk about their issues in an open and supportive space. So I think colleges need to shed more light on that, especially in my state.
Yeah, I think piggybacking off what Rachna said, I think it's also important to be really honest with students. I remember, like, I know here at UMD, what we see often is that we see a lot of orientation folks coming out, like new students coming to campus and stuff. And we see often that, the universities want to market themselves, right? This is a great place to be. It's going to be the best time of your life. But also it's important to be transparent about, college is different than your previous experiences that you may be coming from. And, things are going to be tougher, but we're here to support that. And here are like the different things that we have and that we can offer to support students going through anything. So I think if anything, just being a little bit more transparent about the different mental health resources that we have available to offer.
How would you both say that inclusion and belonging factor into student mental health? Zafir, if you'd like to answer that one first.
Yeah, that's a big one because in mental health is more of like a human issue. If anything, it doesn't exactly impact just one certain population. It impacts everyone. So how do we like cater our mental health programming and assistance towards different marginalized groups, minorities, religious groups, LGBTQ? How do we support all these different folks? I mean, it's important to, I think, for universities maybe to kind of do a little bit of a survey to kind of understand people from these different demographics. How do they view their mental health? What are they doing to stay happy and, have a good mental outlook. So all these sorts of things. But I'll let Rachna piggyback off that one.
Yeah, so like I was saying earlier, I think mental health issues can correlate directly to feeling lonely and to feeling like you don't have people that surround you that understand you and relate to the feelings that you've been going through. And that's why I think diversity, equity, and inclusion is so important to fostering mental health growth on campus. I go to a less diverse university, and just seeing the people around me, it can be a little uncomfortable at times. Like sometimes you feel like there's nobody quite like you. There's nobody that understands like how you grew up, how you were raised, your values. And that's why diversity, equity, inclusion is so important, that you can have this community of people that you feel more comfortable speaking towards, and you feel they will relate to you more than other people.
Mhm. If you could change one thing about how your campus approaches mental health and well-being, what would it be? Rachna, if you'd like to take that one first.
Yeah, I think college campuses today are doing a good job about having mental health resources, having counseling, having all these open resources for their students. But I think one thing that my campus and a lot of other campuses could do better on is just making this more accessible and widespread. We do have a text system that you can text at any time during the day, but I think in-person communication is also really important in your mental health and feeling safe and secure. So I think increasing those in-person group therapy or in-person conversations would be more helpful on my campus.
Yeah, as Rachel mentioned, I think communication is definitely really important on the topic because at least here at UMD, what we see is that there's a lot of resources for, students that might need mental health supports, but it's kind of all scattered. And how do we get that into the hands of students to make them utilize them such that, the counseling center has a productive life and all the other services on campus have a productive life. And I think one way to start with that is kind of having all the communication centralized so that, for example, when a new student joins campus, they typically get a lot of emails from the staffers, like, these are the things you need to complete in order to get on board and whatnot, but also sliding in those mental health resources in there too, mentioning that we have these available to you guys on campus as well. There's also a lot of room and improvement for try to offering trainings for this. I know that at UMD, they offer a lot of trainings for sexual assault prevention, but maybe having a training for mental health awareness, understanding, how to read your peers' emotions, how to help your peers that might be going through something is also just as important.
We're now going to take some questions from the audience. We have a question from Greg Lasky. He asks, how would you recommend faculty moving that poll. How would you recommend faculty best support students in the context of class? Specifically, how to support a student who may not be attending class and are responding to check-in notes due to a mental health issue?
Once again, I think this concept of communication is just so important, especially with faculty to student relationships. Sometimes when you're sitting in a big room full of kids and you're looking at one professor, it might not feel like you have that connection, that you're not able to go and you're able to speak to them. So I think just making it clear to your students that, hey, I am here for you. I am here if you want to talk. That's just a very small thing that can go a long way in a student's mind.
Yeah, I 100% agree with Rachin. I mean, I think that question, it brings up the complexity of the issue, right? Because you have classes that are anywhere from in the double digits or even single digits, and you have classes that are in the hundreds, right? And how do you pinpoint those students that might be struggling not coming to class? It's tough for teachers to do. And I think what teachers need to make an effort is, as Rachna mentioned, is just, be open, just mention, hey, I'm a resource for you. I understand that this is a class, but I'm here to help you out, get through this. This does not have to be, a grueling task. Education is something that we all grow in and thrive in. So I think just advertising more of that positivity to come with is really important.
We have some other questions from the audience. Nancy from the University System of Maryland asked, how do we help, sorry, I misread that. Are the mental health topics we are seeing new, or are we more sensitive after the pandemic?
I don't think that they're new. I just feel like they're more common after the pandemic. We've struggled with these issues before, but I think after the pandemic, this feeling of loneliness and feeling excluded and isolated really just came into fruition more, especially in school and campuses. When we're returning back, we still feel alone, even though we're surrounded by people. So I do think that could be a result of the pandemic, but I also think it's a result of us growing up and trying to find ourselves more in college as well.
Yeah, I think Rashna touched on that. It's again, multiple different factors, but to address the core question, I think the pandemic really just put a spotlight on the problem. And because of that, I think we're seeing it more often, we're bringing more awareness to it in our communities. We see it more often on campus. But again, as Rashna mentioned, I think the problem has definitely been here for a very long time, and it's being caused by multiple things. And I think we have a heightened awareness to it now.
Polly Halsey from the College of Southern Idaho asks, how do we help provide proactive opportunities for students to develop a sense of belonging on campus as well as virtually? Sophia, if you'd like to take that one first.
Yeah, I was actually just trying to think how to go about doing that. I know that at UMD, we're trying to pilot that kind of stuff because trying to find your place on campus and is really tough, especially for incoming students, even students that have been on campus for a while. I know myself, I started university at the height of the pandemic, and like adjusting to the virtual classroom as well as like in person was two different experiences for me. And having to go through that belonging phase twice was a bit of a hassle. So I know like Active Minds, especially here at UMD, what we're trying to do is try to like create programming that kind of helps facilitate students developing relationships with others, whether that's by like having like a little chocolate and note and just handing that out to someone random that you might not know, someone that you see often in class, just to kickstart a relationship between people. Um, yeah, that's the only idea I had, but I'll let Arachana take that one on too.
I cannot speak too much on the virtual aspect. I do know that my campus, and it's pretty hard to communicate virtually and form community through a screen. So I feel like that's pretty difficult. But I do go to a very, very large university. I think we're the second largest public university in the US. But I think my college does a really good job of trying to form communities, whether it be through organizations, whether it be through traditions and stuff like that. Our campus is very good at forming communities. We have a lot of organizations like I was talking about earlier, and my campus does a good job of making all of those opportunities clear to students. This past Sunday, we had our MSc open house where 1,200 clubs just line up across the center of our campus, and new students, returning students, they can all walk around, talk to different organizations, see what's going on campus. And I think that's a very big thing, especially for new students to see where they can fit in as well.
I think a theme that both of you have brought up a couple of times is feeling involved in the community and how that increases belonging. Could you speak a little bit more about what your institutions could do to help students get more involved?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm still brainstorming that one because, like, there's that disconnect, right, between staff, administration, and students. Like, how are you going to understand the different experiences? But in terms of getting students involved, there's a lot of ways that can be done. We talked a little bit about communication earlier in the seminar. Communicating to students that of different interests. So, like at UMD, what we have is we have different colleges, and for other universities have the same thing, different disciplines of study, and we have like little email chains that have things that would appeal to certain student groups. And as a result, those email chains are really successful in trying to enrolling student groups into different organizations, clubs, initiatives that they may be interested in. And through that, they build a lot of relationships and friendships. However, there's still that issue of, not being able to reach out for help when they need it because they think that this organization is dedicated just solely for this purpose. I don't exactly have the freedom to express my emotions or seek help for it. So, I think if anything, there needs to be that inclusion of that mental health conversation, that everyone is open to talking about their emotions. Everyone's here for one another in the community. I think that's one way that we can do it, but I'll let Raj continue.
Yeah, my college is very community oriented, and we build this community through tradition. We stand at all the football games. We have all of our little yells. We gig them all the time. We say howdy, and all of these things, they just bring everybody together. But I do think that some minorities on campus don't feel like they should be involved in these traditions, that they're not a true Aggie in a way, just because of who we're seeing participating in these traditions and being in leadership on my campus, especially. I think when you look around and you see one group of people over and over again, you feel like maybe I don't really fit in there. So I think opening the conversation about diversity and inclusion is just one way to help our community grow even more.
Great. Thank you so much for answering that question. I have another question from our viewers. Eric Tothenberg from Kingsborough Community College asks, what effects did COVID have on our current college students? I know we've touched on this a little bit more, but if we could go into more depth. Rashna, if you'd like to take that one first.
I was still in high school when COVID was at its peak, and so that was a struggle for me going from high school into college, still feeling those feelings of isolation and loneliness. And that was a struggle because I had to become a baby adult. I had to learn how to do things on my own, balance classes, clubs, friendships, etc. So that was really hard for me. I know Zafir's a little bit older than me, so he can touch upon that in a second. But that was hard, especially for I'm a junior right now, so people around my age are probably going to struggle with that as well. We were just kind of thrown into it, and I feel like we're still slowly trying to find out who we are and how our futures are going to look.
Yeah, as I mentioned before, like I joined college at kind of like the height of COVID. Like I remember COVID kicked in when I was graduating high school, and I had like online classes, I think for a year and a half or so. And yeah, I think like the big issue, I think as Rachna mentioned, is like that having that community, right? When you're behind a screen and everyone's like, relaxing and like taking class with their cameras off, it's like tough for the teacher to understand who's in the classroom and stuff like that. And it's also tough for us students to kind of intermingle as well. Even though the teachers made the attempt of having discussion sections and whatnot in some of the classes, there wasn't too much engagement because of the virtual platform. And I think that kind of carried over because like you notice, as Racha mentioned, like people are still trying to find themselves. They're not exactly confident interacting with too many people on campus, that there's not exactly too much conversation that initially happens between students. So I think that's one of the big issues of COVID, is that there's like a little bit of a less conversation between people and interactions. That might have been a carryover. I think like Active Minds, we're generally like trying to push to fostering communication between people through different programming and whatnot.
Thanks so much, Zafir and Rachna. Do you guys have any final thoughts that you would like to share with our audience today? I'll give you a moment to think about that, and then Zafir, if you'd like to start with that.
Sure. Yeah. There's a lot that can be done. There's a lot of room for improvement. I think from my personal experience being involved with just like the mental health advocacy work, I think one of the biggest hindrances of progress is just the lack of collaboration. And that could be the lack of collaboration between other organizations on campus that are kind of involved in the same realm, as well as like collaboration between administration and students as well. When we all work together, we have different powers and abilities to do different things and different ways to influence the community that we're trying to serve. And I think there's a lot of room for faculty, staff, admin to engage with the student mental health conversation as well. Faculty can get involved with like little campaigns to like assure students that, finals is not the end of the world. We're here to support you guys. That's just one example I can just come up with. But I think like collaboration is definitely something that we can all do. And I urge everyone in the audience to maybe take that as like a take-home message. Definitely having collaboration in the space of mental health work is super, super important.
I would just say that I think large scale change in mental health needs to be made on an individual to individual level. This is a personal thing. To increase our empathy, we need to increase our openness, and just the fact that we communicate more about our mental health. Nobody should be told nobody should feel like they need to be silent about how they're feeling, what issues they're facing. And so, like Sabir was saying, this could come from faculty, this can come from students, this could come from administration. We just need to foster a community of openness and acceptance.
Rachna, if you wouldn't mind repeating your last sentence, it kind of cut out a little bit.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I just said large scale, we need to work on fostering a community of openness and acceptance when we're talking about mental health.
Okay, thank you so much. You both spoke to some very important issues that I know that colleges are thinking about a lot, including inclusion and belonging, but also student involvement, student activities, and Rachna with I know you said GIGM, so that's definitely some school spirit there. I really appreciate you both coming here. I also appreciate everyone who came and listened to today's panel and to our panelists, Zafir and Rachna. Thanks to Active Minds for connecting us with Zafir and Rachna. I'm sorry that we weren't able to get to everyone's questions, but do know that we read them, and your questions are incorporated into our coverage and the ideas for what we will write about. So for the Chronicle, I'm Kate Bellows. Back to you, Ian.